Hello and welcome to The Master's Voice, the podcast series from Mediabrief.com. I'm your host and friend Pavan Chawla, and with me in this episode is one of the most respected visionary professionals in international advertising, strategic communications, marketing, branding, you name it. He's a true visionary. Please join me in welcoming Patrick Collister. Patrick, welcome to the show.
Well, I'm honoured to be on your award-winning podcast, Pavan, genuinely, and I'm really excited. This will go out to a lot of people in the subcontinent, otherwise never have heard of the Caples. So this is a fantastic opportunity for me to give the award show a plug, as well as talk about advertising. So thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Patrick, for your time. And thanks also to my dear friend, Meera Sharat Chandra, who has introduced us. And, I look up to you as much as she does. So wonderful having you on the show.
Big respect to Meera. She's been a judge of the Caples Awards for 2 consecutive years.
Yeah.
She is an extraordinarily generous talent, generous with her time, but also generous in her appraisal of other people's work, which is unusual for creative people. They're often really harsh and say, no, that's rubbish, that's crap. But she's not. She's great. She's very supportive of the creative community. A marvellous person.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. Patrick, before we continue, if we get on to the business end of this conversation, allow me to read your profile for youngsters who might not know much about you. So by your leave, Patrick, here goes. Patrick Collister is one of the most respected visionary professionals in international advertising and strategic communications. In previous lives, Patrick was the executive creative director and vice chairman of Ogilvy and Mather London, which was fun, as he said. Then he was the creative director of a small network of DM agencies, which was less fun, again his words. Good times returned, he says, when he was appointed head of design at The Zoo, Google's creative think tank, and I think Patrick was associated with them for more than 5 years. At present, he is a non-executive creative director at adlib.io, an AI-based advertising management platform, which, given that Patrick, as he says, is older than the founder's parents, is more fun than he could expect at this stage of his career. Patrick is the publisher of Directory, a magazine dedicated to innovations in communications. His book, How to Use Innovation and Creativity in Business, briefly appeared in the Amazon Top 1000 list. Patrick runs training workshops for brands and agencies on creative matters of one sort or another. He shouts regularly at conferences, his words, but is generally regarded as harmless. And let me add my words, he is one of the most respected, the most astute, and the most self-effacing, wonderful leaders and thought leaders in the space of media marketing advertising, in the wrong order perhaps. And Patrick has won many pieces of metal and perspex, including gold lions from Cannes. So that is Patrick Collister, my wonderful distinguished guest in this episode of The Master's Voice on Mediabrief.com. Patrick, shall we begin our conversation?
Oh, let's go.
All right. So, Patrick, quick, this is like a rapid fire.
Okay.
5 words that show what the industry means to you.
Fun, friends, fragmenting, failing, and the last word is a rude word. Sounds like duck, begins with an F, so alliteration.
Wonderful. All right, quickly, name 5 people who you see as inspirations.
David Ogilvy, John Webster, Jeremy Bullmore, David Lubars, and Stu Uthwaite Noel. So I doubt very much whether your listeners will have heard of The Last Guy, but he's a young creative director here in the UK at a time when the UK ad industry is talking a lot about diversity and inclusion. Mm-hmm. He really is walking the walk as well as talking the talk. He's an extremely fine young man who's creating opportunities for disadvantaged kids who want to get into this fantastic industry of ours.
Wonderful. So which organization or which agency is he associated with?
Stu is the creative director of an agency called Creature London, and there are about 50 people, but as I say, well, he's an inspiration to me because the advertising industry has just become incredibly middle class. One of the things that made British advertising the best in the world is that all of these kids from the wrong side of the track came into advertising as a meritocracy. So people like Alan Parker, who became Alan Parker, the filmmaker, people like Ridley Scott, these were working class kids, as I said, from the wrong side of the track. They didn't go to university, they didn't have education, but what they had was raw talent. And 50 years ago, ad agencies made room for them because they were just gifted and energetic and had drive. And sadly, all of that began to dry up. The channels of recruitment became regularized. And so what Stu is doing is looking into this incredible pool of talent. Hasn't been to university. Maybe it's coloured, it's black, it's from Asian background. We should be finding these young people and recruiting them because they're the future. And he's doing it. And I love him for it.
Wonderful, wonderful. All 5 names are truly amazing, and I will do my little deep dive for my own benefit on the last wonderful name that you mentioned. All right, next, 5 great campaigns of all time, in your view. That's a difficult one, I know, but you have to tell me.
Okay, well, I could talk about these for an hour alone, but I'm going to start with the Volkswagen Beetle from DDB, New York. Mm-hmm. And there are so many ads in that great campaign. And the second campaign comes from an English agency, Collett Dickinson and Pierce, no longer with us, sadly, but Hamlet. The Hamlet cigar commercials. I mean, just genius. If you go onto YouTube and look for Hamlet Bunker or Hamlet Photo Booth, they're still fresh, they're still funny. And I used to work at an agency called BMP, and John Webster, who I mentioned earlier, was the creative director there. He never had his name on the door. You were talking about being self-effacing earlier. John was an advertising genius, and in the 70s he created a campaign for Courage Best, and I nominate that. British television had only been colour for about 3 or 4 years. It was still new and exciting, and he did this campaign in black and white. Remember a pint of Best Courage Tea. Very brave. My third campaign, again, the agency was called Howell Henry Chaldecott Lurie. A whole load of young guys. They did some fabulous work for, again, another beer brand, Holston Pils. But my nomination is for Tango. So Orange Tango, marvellous. And Blackcurrant Tango, there's a TV commercial called Sebastian, I think, which is just brilliant. Just brilliant copywriting.
Wow.
Fallon Minneapolis for BMWfilms.com. I mentioned David Lubars earlier. David Lubars was the guy to completely invent this new advertising form. Today we call it branded content, and it's worth $40 billion around the world.
Wow.
And here's Lubars invented it. And BMW Films were the first exposition of that. We're talking about 13 or 14 years ago.
Wow.
And I know you said 5, but I'm going to give you a 6.
Please.
Which is, again, an agency, Crispin Porter Bogusky, who about 10 years ago or so were doing genius work for Burger King, which completely changed advertising. And it started with a brilliant pitch when Alec Bogusky stood in front of Burger King and he said to them, "What business do you think you're in?" And Burger King said, "Well, why? We're in the fast food business." And he said, "No, you're not. No one ever bought a Whopper for its nutritional value, believe me. What people come into a Burger King for is a lift." And that's partly because of the sugar content of a burger. But he said, "You're an entertainment brand. That's how people regard you. They come in because they want life to be a little bit better." And from that brilliant insight and positioning strategy, they did genius stuff.
Right. Very insightful, yes, absolutely.
I'm so sorry. It's supposed to be 5 quick words, and I've already got on.
Not at all, not at all. So, think back to day 1 in advertising versus today. What's been the evolution like of the field of you, Patrick?
Pavan, I jokingly say sometimes that we've moved from a world of jingles and slogans to a world of click and like. And I know it sounds just a daft little phrase, but it really does describe how advertising has changed from all about pushing messages out there to this world in which it's now about pull. How do we pull people into conversation? This digital revolution has been astonishing. And by the way, it's only just starting. Don't get me going on the subject of the metaverse.
Yes, Patrick, things have changed indeed, and how. But what are the simple joys of being in this industry still, and equally, what are the increasing frustrations and challenges?
The simple joy is when you see an idea that you know is going to work. I'm a firm believer in advertising as a force for good, just as I believe that marketing is a force for good around the world. It forces people to make product better, longer lasting. It encourages competition, so the price of things comes down, becomes more available, more affordable. So I really believe in what I'm doing. But it's really difficult. And so as a creative guy, nothing beats that amazing feeling when you know you've cracked it. I used to work with this guy, John Webster, I told you about. I remember one day we were writing a campaign and we had this great idea. And John leaned back, and he'd been doing this for 30 years and was a genius. And he said, "Isn't it amazing? They're paying us to do this." And I still feel enthralled to the power of a great idea. And therein also the frustrations, Pavan, in that I know that 85% of advertising is completely unnoticed because it's just bland, it's beige, it's boring.
Right.
And so the frustrations are when great creative people have their ideas crushed by marketers who don't value them.
It's a tragedy.
So marketers who appreciate creativity are the marketers who change the world, actually. And I just wish there were more of them. I mean, that's one of my frustrations. When I first started in this business, there weren't that many marketers. If you were presenting a campaign to a major client, there might be 2-3 people in the room. Now there are 10 of them, and every single one of them has got the ability to say no or to ask you to change things. It really is death by 1,000 cuts.
Right, absolutely. There are several frustrations always. Let's come to something very sunny, very cheering for me, which is the Caples Awards. Why do the Caples Awards resonate so much with you? Why did you readily grab the opportunity and actually became its custodian?
Well, the thing about the Caples is the 5th year for me, but they've actually been in existence since 1978. So it's our 42nd year, I think, if my maths is right. They were started in New York by a terrifying copywriter called Andy Emerson. Actually, right from the beginning, the Caples has been an award show run for creative people, and it still is. I'm a copywriter, creative director. Duncan Gray, who runs it with me, was an art director before becoming the global creative director for Proximity. So that's the first thing. Most award shows are set up by businessmen to make money out of advertising awards.
Oh, absolutely.
We've set up an advertising award show to recognize and reward creativity because, as creative people ourselves, we know how really difficult it is to do.
Absolutely.
And I think the other thing about the Caples being run by creative people, for creative people, if you look at the last couple of years, Pavan, COVID has brought a scythe through the industry. I mean, people are recruiting again like crazy, but if you go back to the spring of 2020, a lot of people lost their jobs.
Right.
I mean, the idea of having to pay large sums of money to enter your work into an award show when actually jobs are at stake seems to me unseemly, undignified, and that's being gracious about it, you could say. So the Caples is free to enter. I believe that we can run an award show, an annual award show for £75,000, which is probably, that's about 100th of the budget of a big network agency's award entries. And we can do that because we're creative people who care about creative people, and we're building a creative community. We're not in it to make money, which is why we've quite often been called complete idiots. But there you go.
God, I would much rather have many, many more complete idiots like you and your wonderful ilk, Patrick. Because I tell you, like you said, especially now during COVID and, in the aftermath, I hope I can use that word accurately and, I don't have to eat that little word again. I hope it's on its way out. But in times like these, it's absolutely mercenary to the extent of a marauding Moor with swords in both hands.
Oh, I love that word. Yes, it is. It is marauding. But the thing is, of course, awards are important. They're important to creative people because we were talking about how ideas often suffer the death of 1,000 cuts.
Right.
You know, when you win an award as a creative person, it justifies all those late nights, all the pain. The other thing about it, of course, is that awards tend to happen in certain agencies and becomes a magnet for talent.
Right.
So awards are really important to clients too. If you've got a big problem, you want to go to an agency full of clever people who can solve it for you. And they tend to cluster around agencies that win awards. Why? Because they know that actually the whole agency is committed to selling great work. It's not an accident, you know. So when you look at a couple of great Indian agencies, under Piyush Pandey, who I used to know quite well, overly India has done some brilliant work, but also the new upstarts, you know, Taproot was doing fabulous stuff, and really looking forward to seeing more work from Indian agencies. I think COVID made India go quiet. So let's have a bit of noise now.
Right, and the Caples are here for that. So also now just give me a little summary of the dates and more about the upcoming Caples Awards.
So the Caples are free to enter up until March 25th.
Okay.
But then we're going to keep the entries open for another 2 weeks, I think it is. But then we will charge people. And the reason for that is because all the techies uploading this stuff to the website, where we have this absolutely brilliant judging process, but it takes time. So because we're not charging people money, the only way we survive is through sponsorship. So, you know, $10,000 each from WPP, BBDO, God bless Andrew Robertson and his ilk, and Publicis UK. So we've got a very small amount of money, and I have to be very protective of it. And I have to pay, you know, the techie guys. I have to pay them. So there's a 2-week period after the free entries close for creative directors who've been too chaotic. And then we start judging, and judging, I give the judges 10 days, looking at work, and they start deliberating on May the 5th. So they deliberate for 4 days and talk in Zoom. And actually it's been surprisingly successful. And then the shortlist will be out the 8th of May, and then we have the celebration dinner on May the 18th. But the thing about our celebration dinner, again, I go back to the fact that we're free to enter. Most award shows have a big gala dinner and they sell tickets for it. They sell tables. Now, the moment you're selling tables, then what you do is you have huge numbers of categories, and then you insist that the jury has a gold, silver and bronze in each one. And we don't. We say to the jury, you can award as many or as few awards as you want. And we're not trying to sell tables. We're not trying to sell and make money out of that.
On the side, yes.
So the dinner is small and it's free, but we make it virtual. And we have people from around the world coming in to receive their awards virtually. It's actually really good fun. And that's May the 18th.
Patrick, thanks for that little summary of the important dates of the Caples Awards this year, all the way up to the finals and the awards being given out. How many categories do you have this year?
Well, the first thing I did when I took over the Caples was to halve the number of categories.
Okay.
But this year I've introduced some new ones, and so we're up to 18. But that's still, Cannes Lions, which I have to say is still the biggest and the most important show in the world, but Cannes Lions has just under 300 categories and subcategories. So I think 18 is pretty good. But the new ones, we've got a Newcomers Award, which is for students and or people outside the industry who would really like to get in as creative people, and that's sponsored by Publicis. We've got the Planet Earth category this year, for obvious reasons. It is the biggest single problem facing all of us, facing humanity, and so we wanted to be able to see what marketers and what advertising folk around the world are doing about this, what ideas are out there. And I used to have one traditional media category, but we've split that into print, TV and radio, just to make it easier for the judges.
Absolutely. So your deliberations also would be that much more in-depth and that much more satisfying for everybody, the judges. Excellent. Thank you and congratulations on keeping Caples the awards and the entries this year, as also last year, free to enter till the 31st of March. And then, of course, there'll be just 2 weeks where there is a payment that is required because of the technical costs of the updates and the uploads. Thereafter, of course, till the 18th of May, we have to wait. So you've kept up with the tech, Patrick. That's wonderful. You've done a deep dive into areas like AI and also like ad platforms. So what essential advertising principles must still underpin these areas in order to be consumer facing?
Again, this is such a big subject. I'm so worried at the moment, Pavan, because digital advertising on the internet there's just too much of it. And not only is there too much of it, it's too bad. And as a result of that, the last time I saw any real numbers, 700 million ad blockers had been installed. So you could say that probably a billion devices now have ad blockers because advertising is just pervasive and intrusive. And there's a real need for creativity, for creative people to get involved again. But a lot of clients are now just spraying advertising across the internet because it's cheap as chips. I can buy 1 billion media impressions for a relatively small sum of money. So why bother with creativity when actually I know that there's going to be a distressed purchase somewhere? And even if it's only a 0.02% click-through rate, it is still justifying my spend. It isn't justifying the fact that advertising message is complete crap. And that's what really worries me. Not only do people hate advertising now so much that they will pay for streaming services to avoid it, but actually they hate advertising people too. I mean, in the UK 2 years ago, a survey discovered that advertising executives were considered less trustworthy than politicians. And I have to say, I mean, this is Boris Johnson who led us out of Europe with a whole series of lies. Advertising executives are less trustworthy than Donald Trump, who was reputed to lie 200 times a day throughout his term of office. And you think, Mike, we've brought this upon ourselves. And the reason for that, of course, is the media creative split has been ruinous. And so I'm really hoping that as a result of the deprecation of third-party data, the cookie, that creative and media are going to have to come back together again in order to be able to get people to surrender data voluntarily to engage with brands. So I'm hopeful that actually technology has got us into a jam, but technology can also get us out of it.
Absolutely. And I think the big body blow to mediocrity is already being felt by those who are not very, very creative, thanks to the ad blockers. And that's also the result of technology. At the same time, since you're talking about, and mediocrity has come up, how do we continue to champion sharply honed creativity in a world that seems okay with mediocrity? See, one thing that I have noticed is that over the recent past, let's say over the last 2 years maybe, most brands are not so much into brand building. And I mean, if you look at an Amazon, for instance, or a Flipkart in India or whatever, they just have tiny little tactical ads because of the lower or lesser attention spans that viewers have, okay? And therefore, they're only into saying, okay, it's this day, it's this sale, these are the products, these are the kind of discounts, etc., and or the cow finished, that's about it. And that seems to, about a couple of years or maybe more, the Times of India along with Google came out with this amazing, I think 2 or 3 minute ad, which was really wonderful about India and Pakistan and the emotional connects. So that was an amazingly creative thing, but that's more the exception than the rule. Facebook came out with something about a sweetmeat shop and how everybody helps her through Facebook. So it was a great mix of, promoting your own business and also talking about building a brand beautifully, very emotionally, which people relate with and connect to, So how do we still continue to champion the cause of creativity? The Caples Awards does, but, in general, what do you do? How do you protect the value of ideas and how do we protect the self-respect and self-worth of the creators?
Well, it's an interesting thing you've just raised there, and I think you're right. In the last couple of years, we've noticed CMOs looking at the advertising funnel very differently. What they used to do was to look at the top of funnel, brand building, brand awareness, and that's where they spent all of their time working with their ad agency on devising those strategies.
Correct.
And then that used to leak down into the middle funnel and then down into the, if you like, the direct marketing.
Yeah.
But actually, a couple of years ago, I think they began to change because they began to notice that small ideas work. In fact, small ideas often work in terms of immediate sales better than big ideas. And so clients have now been looking, as I say, for loads of small activation. And the reason for that, of course, is because thanks to digital, if you do make a sale, an immediate sale, it's instant. And so again, I go back to COVID. You know, in March 2020, it looked as if the world had fallen off a cliff. And so CEOs were saying to CMOs, just sell our stuff. And so all of these, as I say, small campaigns, direct marketing, direct technique, lower funnel advertising, that's what people were concentrating on, just to stay in business. And then, of course, there was this retail revolution as a result of COVID. You know, so for example, I find it so fascinating that certainly in the UK and in America, sale of cars absolutely plummeted, but sale of vans went up. Why? Because Amazon and everybody else is delivering stuff. And But I think long-term brand building is where long-term profit resides. And I think I loved the way you talked about how we hope that this is behind us all now. I think long-term brand building, marketers will begin to realize those brands who did maintain a brand presence have come out of this stronger and with increased brand share. And for those brands who've just been concentrating on short-term results, it's going to cost them a lot of effort as well as money to actually replace their market share, I think.
Well said. Absolutely. Very insightful, Patrick. So, Patrick, you spoke about long-term is where the real profits reside in terms of thinking, creativity, brand building, etc. So, long-term as in timeless also. Let me ask you to go back and then reflect upon and then come back here and tell me, what do you see as unwavering principles and carved in stone constants in a shape-shifting communications industry? What must we never give up doing?
Well, I think we must never give up trying to interest people in products that will make their lives better. It could be a new kind of can opener that will prevent you from getting cut or whatever it is. Because if we're able to do that, to interest people, then what happens is markets become more competitive and we, customers, are the beneficiaries of that. So I think, I don't know, I love the McCann's promise from before the war, but the truth well told. And so I think we should stick to that, yes.
Wonderful. The truth well told. So ultimately, all of us are into the business of, creating engagements that empower business, enterprise, initiative, anything, right? Patrick, anything else that I should have asked you that you wish I should have asked you? Or you'd like to just add for our listeners?
Well, what I would like to say to your listeners is one of the joys for me of the last few years is seeing at Cannes, for example, print advertising has just become visual puns. And I love the fact that the English language in advertising is being kept alive and used with wonderful vibrancy in India. And so long copy and copy in Indian advertising is still a thing. And I love that. Also, we talk about the digital revolution, but there are still millions of people who do not have a smartphone, who do not have a computer,
right?
Who are relying on other forms of communication to get news about anything, let alone product.
Right.
So I've got great admiration and respect for the creative product coming out of India. or at least the best of that creative product, which I think competes with the best in the world. Also, Piyush Pandey is truly one of the great advertising figures in the world, and I do remember him bringing a team from Ogilvy, India, when they won one of the very first ever direct marketing awards. So they were all sitting there, and in the early days, before they had the direct marketing awards in a separate place to the Palais, but Piyush was absolutely magnificent, won their award. They all walked up, they picked up the award, and then they all walked down and straight out of the building and straight into a bar on the other side of the street.
That is so Piyush. He wears his heart on his sleeve and says, "Come on, guys." Wonderful, Patrick. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed our conversation. What did you think of our chat so far?
Oh, Pavan, it's been a joy. A Saturday afternoon well spent. No, honestly, Mediabrief, which I read electronically, I get all of your email links, is this window into another world. I mean, one of the things about COVID is it's closed down communities. And so the wider world of advertising is something that you have been showing me every week. And so thank you very much for that. I've seen some great campaigns, by the way, and it's been very stimulating. So I hope Mediabrief continues on its rise, its inexorable rise. The trade press in some parts of the world, I think, has become expensive. And actually, the quality of journalism has, I think, been sadly not what it used to be. So stick with it, my friend. Stick with it. And with any luck, you'll become a global advertising platform. You work so hard, mate. It's so late in India. I am filled with admiration for you.
Oh, you're very kind, very generous with your praise and your blessings too, Patrick, and they are very, very precious, and I cherish them. So on behalf of my entire team at Mediabrief.com and the Master's Voice podcast series, thank you ever so much for gracing this episode, and I'm sure everybody will be thrilled with what they hear on the show. Patrick Collister, one of the most respected visionary professionals in international advertising and custodian and guardian of the wonderful, the amazing Caples Awards, has been my distinguished guest on this episode of The Master's Voice on Mediabrief.com. I hope you found the conversation as insightful, as enlightening, and as inspiring, and as heartwarming as I did. Till we meet again in the next episode of The Master's Voice on Mediabrief.com, this is your host and friend Pavan Chawla saying, stay safe, remain positive, but test negative. Bye-bye.